Hi everyone, my name is Kira. I'm an English teacher, and in this video we're going to be doing a teardown of a sample essay for the comparative section of English paper 2. More specifically, the question will be under the mode of theme or issue, and it's from 2017. So let's jump straight in and have a look at the question. So our sample answer here on the left, and for the purpose of this video we're going to be breaking down the question itself and looking at the specifics, making a quick mention of the marking scheme and what we should be looking for, and then going through the actual body of the essay, including the introduction and the conclusion. Now let's look at the question. As always, with the comparative questions, they're very wordy, they're quite long questions, so it's really important to really get to grips with exactly what's being asked of you, and that can be really tricky and really difficult to do. So that's why we always spend time breaking down the question and making sure we have an understanding of what's needed of us. Otherwise you're just going to go in blind and it's going to be very waffly and really not going to maximize your marks. So it starts with a quote: many reasons why the exploration of the same theme or issue can be more entertaining in some texts than in others. So the first thing to do is decide on what your theme or issue is going to be. The student has chosen gender as a common theme that's prevalent across the 3 different texts that they have studied. Obviously you can choose different kinds of themes as well, that's entirely up to you, but you look at the specifics of the question and see what applies to your particular theme and will you have enough to say about it. Now the main part of the question then: compare the reasons why you found the exploration of the same theme or issue more entertaining in some texts than in others. Okay, so that's the specifics of the question. So is it basically looking at the theme across each text? How did you engage with it? Was it better, more entertaining, more interesting in one than in other? So it was how the theme was developed and how you enjoyed that development. And the final part of the question: support your answer with reference to 3 texts on your comparative course, the all-important key moments. So you must reference key moments throughout the essay. Okay, you can't have enough references to your text. It shows that you know your texts and it helps you to back up your points and to give evidence. Okay, so quick look to the marking scheme now. The all-important PCLM that we know, this is 70 marks divided, so 30% of the marks for PC and the L, that's 21 marks each, and then our 10% for our mechanics, as we know. Most importantly here that I like to focus on is the codes. So for the comparative essays, it's the most important thing is obviously the comparison. So, it's the name, it's in the name, comparative. The examiner code in this case is CRE. So the key words there that are important are the comparison, reasons, and entertaining. So the comparison reasons why the exploration of theme or issue can be more or less entertaining. So the reasons and the entertaining are important, and all important comparison. You can't have enough of those C's. Remember, the examiner puts C's in your margin every time you make a comparison. So really we want loads and loads of comparisons and connections drawn across the 3 texts. Okay, now let's jump into and have a look at the actual essay itself. Again, like I mentioned at the start, the introduction is really important in the comparative essay because it helps you to get to grips with exactly where you're going with the essay and keeps you focused. And in that introduction, I would say it's divided into a couple of things. I'd say maybe 3 things that are the most important things that we need to be mindful of. And the first one is the theme itself. And as I said, you need to say straight away what theme you are choosing and where you're going with it. So the theme, in this case, the student has given a definition. It says the theme is the central concept intertwined throughout the text. And then they've chosen gender. Okay, a really nice one. It's broad enough that there's lots to say about it. And in these 3 particular texts specifically, it's a really good one to talk about. The second part is we must address the question. I must show the examiner that I understand what's being asked of me and this is what I'm going to do. So we know that the specifics of the question is how entertaining this theme is across each of the texts and how we compare those. So it's how this theme is revealed through plot events, character development, and symbolism. And that there's a further comment down here that says the theme is greatly prevalent in all 3 texts. So we know it's just an introductory way of saying that gender is hugely important across these 3. It's entertaining, but the essay itself is where I'm going to say which is more or less entertaining and how and why that is. And the third and final part that you should make reference to in the introduction is the key moments. Like we said earlier, that's the supporting your answer with reference to the text. It's the solid one. It's in every question across the exam. Support your answer with evidence of the text or with reference to the text. But it's so important, and it's constantly asking you to always give evidence behind any of your arguments. So the fact that it says in the last line of the paragraph, through an assortment of key scenes. So key moments, key scenes, they're going to be mentioned a lot. Okay, into the main body of the essay then, like I said, this student has decided to kind of subdivide gender and look at three main subtopics, and they are masculinity, relationships, and the role of women. So really you're kind of breaking it up into the men, the women, and then how the men and the women interact together. A few things to watch out for, make sure to avoid and to look into, and to be careful of, to organize your points. So again, like doing it like that, do men, do women, do, the relationships together, subdividing them, and making sure you have a clear sequence in your head, linking them from one point to the next so that they flow and that they don't seem too disjointed. Keeping the question in mind. That's why we spent all that time there breaking down the question and looking at the introduction. So important. And finally, compare throughout. Don't just have one comparative word like similarly in or in contrast in each paragraph. It's much better to be constantly drawing connections. It shows that you're constantly comparing. So let's have a quick look then at each of these. And the first one is masculinity, and this is straight away first line. It's a topic sentence. The initial disparity between the three texts is their portrayal of masculinity. So we know straight away, what we're talking about, and there's no kind of dawdling or beating around the bush here. We're straight into it. Okay. Then we see that there's lots of reference to key moments. So introduction, the pivotal moment, an opening stage direction, pivotal scene, and later using this. So there's constant reference to different key moments across the three different texts in the one paragraph. And that's really, really important. You're not just trying to, what students fall down is they try to give one key moment in one paragraph and they just summarize the key moment. You don't need to do that. You only need to reference it to show that you knew what happened in it and you used it. You're using it as evidence or as sort of support for your main point. Okay, the main point here is the comparisons as well. So the main point is masculinity and is the dealing with masculinity and the theme of masculinity across each of these three texts. So in order to do that, we have to make sure we're comparing. So you'll see there in the comparisons, we've got this is similar to when we're comparing between The Great Gatsby and All My Sons. And then in sharp contrast further down is again when we're comparing that to the film Les Miserables. So again, it's nice that we're not just seeing one word of comparison. It's kind of throughout the piece. Secondly, then relationships. So it's how all of these men and women manage to sort of deal with each other, I suppose. Again, comparisons in this whole paragraph, they're throughout. And what's important to note is that people kind of always think of comparison. Oh, I can only make a comparison if something is similar, or, those two texts are similar, so I can use a comparison, but it's not really like that in the other one. Remember that a comparison is a similarity and a difference. So in this case, that love is completely absent. However, there is an overabundance of lust. So again, that's kind of the first part of the comparison there. And then the further down, when it says in All My Sons, I believe the lack of love is paralleled. So again, it's not always the same language. It's not repeating the words similarly in or whatever. Further down then, unlike the aforementioned texts, it seems that it's blah, 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 Les Mis. So this is talking about the first two texts and then saying, unlike these two, Les Miserables is like this. So it's showing that two are very similar, but one is very different in the way that relationships are sort of unfolding and the way they're entertaining or not entertaining. The key moments there again, like we mentioned, again, you can see all the little quotation marks. The supercilious manner, goes off on a spree, cold fried chicken between them, hasn't been laid up in 15 years. All direct quotes, really nicely done. And it's not crucial to use direct quotation in the same way that it is in the single text. Key moments and reference to the moment itself, it can often suffice, but to really get that H1 and to get more of those marks, a few little quotes like this are really, really valuable, and they really do gain you more marks. So again, showing that there's constant reference to the text, to all three texts, not just only quoting from one. Really trying to mix it up a bit as well and show good knowledge of all three texts. Okay, third point then was mentioned was the role of women and how women are portrayed. And I think it goes on to talk about the objectivity of women as well in the next paragraph. So again, comparative language, the several phrases, something that's universal in all three texts, all three prominent female characters. Okay, so that's telling us that the main female character in each three texts, like that we're making a comment or an assumption about all three of them. That's bringing them together and making a link. Similar to Fitzgerald's tendency of writing female characters, ... And contrastingly, again, really varying it up, not always just saying in contrast, or this is similar to, or this is different to. Try to vary your comparative language as much as possible. And the second thing that this particular point does as well is it offers an insight into social context, which is really important, even though I know we're talking about the theme of gender, but it shows to the examiner that, you know, this student has a good insight into the world of the text as well, which overlaps a little bit into your cultural context. And it says that and it's also another comparison, because it's saying that all of these women violate a societal taboo, which is the case in these 3 texts. Okay, on to the conclusion then. And again, it's just as important as the introduction in the sense that it helps to kind of wrap everything up, but it's an opportunity not to bring in new points, but to consolidate what's already been said. Okay, so again, I mentioned the social context in the last point, but it's really showing that after all of this discussion of all 3 texts and all of my examples of gender and how entertaining it is, or how interesting the dealing of how it's dealt with, all of that has given me the insight to tell me more about the world that each of these stories kind of takes place in. So the context of the societies is mentioned then. And most importantly, because the question, if you remember, asked, how do we compare the dealing of the theme and whether it's more or less entertaining in each of these texts? No one can say if something is entertaining except for you as an audience or a reader. So it's about personal engagement. And that's so important that this student has included several phrases at the end here to suggest that personally, you know, that what they found interesting or what they found entertaining. So in that first line there, that it proved incredibly interesting. Or further down, I found exploring this issue intriguing and entertaining. That's directly addressing what the question is asking you to do. And then further on, something is that this has allowed me to further ponder. So it shows a deep level of engagement, a deep level of involvement with these texts. You've shown that you know your texts, you've shown that you understood them, but also that you enjoyed them and that you had a lot to say about them. And that's ultimately what the examiner wants you to do. Okay, and finally then, we also bring in that level of comparison. We've been comparing throughout. It wasn't just one paragraph of comparing and then the rest of key moments. We constantly compared in every paragraph. And now in the conclusion, I have an opportunity to just say in all 3 texts equally, this level of engagement was there, and both similar and in different ways. So there's a couple of examples there of comparison in the conclusion, just reminding the examiner that you have compared throughout and you've made connections and made links between your 3 texts. Okay, that brings us to the end. And for a full version of the sample answer and an annotated version, you can go to studyclix.ie.